I think most of them back there are kids who are dismissed. For the rest of us, I hope you have a Bible near you. If not, there are a few in the pews. Now we're going to go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Has anybody known something and you forgot you knew it? And have to be reminded of it? Like you knew something, oh yeah, I forgot.
Like a dentist appointment.
Oh, okay. And they'll call you up and they'll say, oh, were you planning on being here an hour ago? Anybody else ever knew you knew something, but forgot that you knew it? And we're going to talk about that as we study through the Bible today in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, because Paul's going to remind them that they knew something, and he doesn't remind them as if they didn't know. He says, I want to remind you because I know you do. Now, there are two different ways we can do that. We can either say, come on, I know you know. Or we can say, come on, I know you know. Now, those were the exact same words, but they're so much different. And sometimes it is not what we say, but how we say it, and the motive by which we're trying to say it that will make all the difference. So if you have your Bibles open to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, I'm going to begin reading in verse number 1. Hope that you will follow along or join with me. It says, for you yourselves know, brothers. Now let me just stop for a second. Anytime the word adelphos is used in the Greek, it doesn't just mean guys. Right here when it says adelphoi, it means the total church. The people who call yourselves God's children. So we're not just talking to the male gender right now. We're talking to God's kids. And so he says, dear church, for I know you know, dear church, that our coming was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please men, but to please God, who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with pretext, nor for greed. God is our witness. Nor do we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made that demand upon you as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother would a baby that weighs 1.1 ounce. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the good news of Jesus Christ, but our very selves, because you had become agapetoi to me. Wow, this is a very powerful passage. Let's go ahead and jump right in. If we were to go to seminary, they would say this is disclosure formula theology. What does that mean? It begins. Now, how many of us have a version of the Bible that just say, you yourselves know, but it doesn't say, for you yourselves know? Let me just say, a lot of people say, oh, that is just semantics. It is more than that. This word here in the Greek, gar, is saying, I know that you know, and you don't need me to ask this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So sometimes when we leave a word out, we say, are we really discrediting the text? Absolutely, we are. And so in the Greek, it says, for you yourselves ought to know. It is a disclosure, not to tell you something new, but to find out if you still remember. Now, my birthday is Tuesday. I expect everybody to remember that. I expect phone calls. I expect motorcycles. Just one is enough. Don't we expect certain things? And should we have to remind you, have you ever had this conversation in a fight, where you say something and you say, well, if I've got to remind you, then I guess it wasn't important to you. You ever heard that? No. Now, Paul is not trying to belittle them. He is trying to say, come on, remember. Remember this with me. Come on, let's get together. For you yourselves know. Now, interesting that he would say you yourselves. Because shouldn't he just say you know? But you yourselves know. You know and y'all know. It's sort of like if we were in the South, it would be y'all and all y'all. For all y'all know. You yourselves know. And you know what? This word here for know is not the normal word, gnosko. The gnosko word in the Greek means you've experienced it, you've touched it, you've tasted it, you have first-hand connection to it. How many of us know that in 1972, a group of Israeli athletes were rounded up at the Munich Olympics, taken out to the tarmac and killed? How many of us know that? That is oidike. Were you there? But do you know that that happened? I was there. Because my group was the group that was sent in to round them up. I was not there when it happened, but my group was part of the Army group that was sent in to take over the Munich Olympic tarmac. I have gnosko. I touched and felt and knocked on doors with my M16. I actually felt it. But guess what? It's just as real for you. If all you have is just the knowledge. You know what he's saying? Is that this is first-hand information. You can go back and you can study all this first-hand history. You don't have to have been there, but he is saying, we preach the gospel, and not everybody in Thessalonica had accepted the Lord, but everybody heard that the Lord had been preached here. You know what's the truth? Not everybody in Los Banos believes in Jesus Christ. But one of our goals at this church is to make sure that the whole town knows that Jesus is and well, and loves, and is coming again. And so our job is not, that's God's job to save. Our job is to just make sure they know that there is a God who loves them. And he goes on to say that it wasn't in vain. Now most of us think of the word kanee and think vanity. Vanity of vanities. Anybody ever read through, when you take a look at Ecclesiastes and it says vanity of vanity, everything is all vanity. The difference between being in vain or being vanity is it's all about me. Vain is it was all about the process. He says it was not foolishness or worthlessness for us to come to you. So we didn't come there in vanity. We came there so that the preaching of the Lord would have value and worth. And it wasn't in vain. Because your lives show God's work works. Over 1 million Muslims and non-Muslims in the Philippines have turned to Christ because somebody thought preaching Jesus was more important than being a professional basketball. Millions of people in China came to Christ because somebody thought it was more important to preach Christ than to be a world-class athlete in England like Eric Liddell. It wasn't vain. They heard and they responded. He says, you know what happened to us in Philippi. And again, this is another one of those, I am reminding you. So it's disclosure formula. I am reminding you how I suffered. How many of us have suffered financially? How many of us have suffered geographically? Maybe you want to live in Merced and you're stuck in Carlsbad. And you're torn. You're suffering for different reasons. Maybe you broke a couple of hips. Maybe there's other things going on in your lives. Kicking drugs. We are suffering. But suffering should never shut us down. It should remind us to rely upon God. He says this, in Philippi, we were bold even though we preached God in the midst of much conflict. Much conflict. You see, for most of us, when I experience conflict, I just say, okay, fine. I back off. When Paul experienced conflict, he didn't push to irritate, but he didn't let suffering or conflict derail him either. I don't know about you, but for some of us, we're looking for an excuse to stop. And it can be little. Paul says, love God so much that no excuse can stop you. And little becomes much. Is serving God hard? Yes. Is serving God in some such situations difficult? Yes. Can I preach God in the midst of conflict? Absolutely yes. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, I don't really give the gospel to my family anymore because all we do is just start to conflict and it's not worth it. So what's the alternative? Let's not have the conflict and just let them go to hell. Right? I know I've told you this story, but we bought 10 acres of land in a church that I served in Texas, and we had too many people coming to the church. You know what I mean by that? God was blessing us, and we just didn't have enough space. And so we were going to build another church, and I saw the plans for the new church, and the plans for the new church was smaller than the church we already had. And so I asked the head person on the blueprint committee, what's going on? And he goes, well, that's the size we need. We don't need anything any bigger than that. And I said, you do realize that with the number of seats you're putting in, we can't even seat the people who are current. We only have one service. I said, are you looking to do two services? No. I said, we can't even put the people we have coming in, much less grow. And he said this, that's all we need. And so I thought I was going to be really bold and say something just so outlandish. And I said, and the rest of the people here in Hazel, Texas, could just go to hell, right? He said, they'd be all right. Without batting an eye. That'd be all right. Some people say, in the midst of conflict, what do we do? I don't want to ruin Thanksgiving. I don't want you to ruin Thanksgiving either. But I think it needs to be more than just, I'm worried about ruining Thanksgiving. How about, I love you too much to let you go to Christ's eternity? What a difference. Let's take a look at verses 3 and 4. It says, for our appeal. Again, notice there's that word for again. For our appeal. This is discourse. And so in this disclosure discourse formula, he is saying, for again, I want to remind you, for our appeal. What do you do to look appealing? Not appalling, appealing. How many of us got up this morning thinking, maybe it would be a good idea to shower before I went to church? How many of us got up this morning and said, maybe it would be a good idea to shower and maybe shave your head? I shaved mine this morning. That's what godly people do. How many of us got up this morning and thought about putting on clean clothes? Not the best clothes in the world, but clean clothes at least. How many of us got up and decided to put this beautiful makeup on? Now let's not forget what Chuck Swindoll said. If the barn needs paint. Okay, we prepare ourselves. What do we do to look appealing? Now let's go back to the days when, like if you're here and you're married, and you knew that that special someone was going to come. How many of us got painstakingly ready for them to come? How many of us get ready for God and then be ready to be used by God so that when we're out in the world for God, the word of the preaching of the gospel is appealing rather than appalling? And he says, you know how we appealed. Now the word here is parakinesis. How many of us have ever heard the Greek word for the Holy Spirit? Parakaleo. In other words, when we go into the world with the appeal, look at verse number 3, when I appeal to you, we should be going into the world with the appearance as if Christ himself walked into that room. As if the Holy Spirit had entered. Not, ta-da, here's me. But praise the Lord, Jesus is real. And so he says, I came. Para means I'm called alongside. SS means so that you will see the value and the virtue of it. I have been called alongside to see so you see the value and the virtue of what Christ has done in my life. So that you'll desire to have that same in your life. Because I love you, I don't just love my reputation, I love you. He says, for you know how I appeal to you. The word here in many versions of Greek It says invitation. How many of us know we do invitations at the end of some services? I invite you to raise your hand. Sometimes we invite people even to come forward. I invite you to get with one of our leaders and pray with them. But the word also means to encourage. I encourage you, come to Christ. Now, if I really believed in it, really, really believed in it, I would encourage you to go to Six Flags. I would encourage you to go to SeaWorld. I would encourage you, not just try to scare you out of Hades, but encourage you into God's love. You see, the net result is both heaven. But the aim is so much different. One is a scare tactic, one is a love affair. I don't want you to be afraid of hell. I want you to be in love with Jesus. What a difference. He says, and I didn't come with error. Notice, he said, my appeal to you does not spring from error. Error means I didn't take the time to evaluate and find out if what I was saying was true. Have you ever heard somebody use statistics and you knew that they didn't really believe the statistics they were using, but they could sure throw out statistics? This is what I have found out. That 9 out of 10 people who used statistics in the 1880s still went ahead and recorded it on Facebook anyway. See, I can say anything and throw a statistic in there and I go, ooh, it's got statistics. Error means what? It means I am going to say something and I haven't taken the time to even evaluate its truth. He said, I didn't do that. When I came to you, I came appealing, godly, and I did not come with error. And the next word is this word, akatharasis. It means I didn't come to make things worse for you. Now, to make things worse or to be impure means to take you from a good person and make you a worse person. In our Sunday school class, we talked about instigators. Anybody know what an instigator is? An instigator is a person who tries to get you to do something that they don't want to do, but they want to know what the outcome is going to be. My brother told me that if I took a towel from the laundry room and tied it around my neck, I could jump off the patio roof of our house and I could glide all the way back to our neighbor's house. Error? Yes. Impure reasoning? Yes. So, as smart as I was, I wanted to tie the towel around my neck. Now you would say, once we learn that people don't really care about us, that we learn our lessons, but my brother decided it was the Olympics, and we decided we would play javelin throw. Isn't that an Olympic sport? And so, naturally, I was the smallest kid of all my brother friends. He was older than I am. And so they said, go ahead and throw first. I thought they were just being gracious. I went ahead and throw first. And how do you mark the spot where the javelin comes down if you only have one javelin? I still got the big old hole in my head where I ate the javelin. You know, if you're going to people with impure motives and you're not bringing Christ, they're going to feel like a pincushion for your joy. He said, I didn't do that. He said, I came to you encouraging you and inviting you as if God himself came to you. I didn't use error. I didn't have impurity. I didn't try to deceive you. The word here for deceive is dolo, meaning to try to manipulate you so that you will be my javelin cushion. What does he say in verse 4? But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel of God, so we speak to you. Not because we wanted to tickle your ears or make you like us. It's because I want to please God. The next time you're worried about whether or not you're going to ruin Thanksgiving, ask yourself this: am I going to be quiet and please Uncle so-and-so, or am I going to lovingly appeal and invite and encourage and please God? Who is my highest source? Let's take a look at verses 5 through 7. Disclosure formula again. But we were gentle among you, for we were gentle among you. We came not with flattering words. You know, we didn't come with pretext. You know we didn't come with greed. Now, interesting words that he would use is pretext and greed. Pretext means, how can I swindle from you? And greed is, how can I give it to me? How can I swindle it from you? And in the end, how can it end up in my pocket? I used to do a trick. I would ask somebody to take out any money that they had. Might be a $5 bill, $10 bill, $20 bill, and I would pull out a bill, and hopefully it would be the same nomenclature, but sometimes they have a 5 and I'd have a 10. But I would just say, okay, I want you to study. Study, 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 study. And I would walk up to him like I'm walking up to George, and I would just say, all right, man, you know the difference between these two bills? You do, right? You know the difference? Which one of these did you just give me? And they would touch one, and I would say, thank you. And I'd put it in my pocket. Because what did I just ask them? Which one did you just give me? That's pretext and greed. So they weren't going there to plant the church so they could say, look at what I did. I've got to confess that sometimes in the church we get caught up in the killer bees. Buildings, budgets, and baptisms. And we'll even stand up in front of other Christian groups and we'll say, our church is building bigger buildings, and our church has got better baptisms, and our church has got bigger budgets. Now, it's one thing to rally around what God is doing. It's another thing to have pretext and greed and think, we did it. If God is growing this church, only God can do it. I've heard me preach. It's not that good. Only God can do it. And so when all of a sudden we start believing our own press about ourselves, it's greed and pretext. The greatest preacher, Paul, never had it. Verses 5 through 7 says, as God is our witness. You know, whenever somebody says that, I always look at them and go, oh, they're throwing out the God card. Because God is my witness. As if all of a sudden they invoke the name of God, then what they're saying has got to be true. I have found that most of the time when people invoke the name of God, it's because they know they're not true, and they're hoping that, well, if we think God says it, then maybe we'll believe it too. What he is really saying this is, God is the only one that knows the hearts and minds of men. And he is trying to say, I am standing before a God who knows the truth, and if I was to call on him to get in the witness box, he would get in the witness. You know what the word witness is in the Greek? Martyr. If he was to become a martyr, he wouldn't just get up there and just say yes. He would say this, if I'm lying, I'm dying, and God will intervene. When we go to people, do they feel loved and encouraged, or do they feel manipulated and preached at rather than loved up? Wow, what a difference. Disclosure formula again in verse number 8. What does it say? So because of all of this, so in light of this, let's do some conclusions. It says, so because of this, being affectionately desirous of you. Now, he didn't even know them when he went there. But the more time he spent with the non-saved people in Thessalonica, the more in love with them he fell. The first time you guys went to Russia, have you guys both been to Russia? The first time you did you know any of the people? Do you love them now? Wow, what a difference. Going there and being with them and seeing them and bringing the good news of Jesus Christ to them makes a difference. You fall in love with the lost people. And so he says, I came to you because God sent me, but I fell in love with you because God sent me. We love you. We were ready to share with you. Now this word here for ready means to delight. I alluded to this verse, Psalms 37:4, that says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will do what? His promise is what? We heard that the men's heard this last weekend. Claim God's promises. Believe God's promises. If I delight myself in the Lord, he will give me the... You see, the problem is I try to set my own desire scale. And my desire scale for me might look like this. God's desire scale for me will look like this. And why am I settling for this when God says there's so much more? And I'm going to use the proper phrase, more better. Isn't that a good English phrase? More better? That's Ray Spann, in case you know. God says, delight yourself in me, and I will give you desires and delights that you don't even know you have yet. But you got to come to me. Delight means to share the good news. Delight means also to share the life. Now, the word here for life is this word, the word sukos, where we get our word suke, where we get our word psychology, the study of the suke. And so he says, I can take your soul and your spirit and your strength and use it in such a way that to serve others is a joy rather than. So because of all of this, you became dear to me. This word here for dear is agapeto. Anybody see the word agape in there? He says, because of desiring the Lord and serving the Lord, I fell in love with you guys. You became dear to me. So dear to me, I can't stand not being with you. Have you ever just been forced to be apart? Your heart is one place and people are the other place. And yet, absence doesn't necessarily make the heart grow fonder. But if the heart is already fond, it can really make the heart grow fond. Let's put it together. Number one, how do we make it real in our world today? They. Now, who are the they? How about the person that antagonizes you at work? They need to know. What about the person that antagonizes you, lives 2 doors down the street and keeps his grass completely green when I can't keep my grass completely green? That has to be her husband, but that would say they need to know. What about other people in the church? They need to know too. But what do they? You see, so many times we want to tell they something. What do we need to do with the they? We need to do this. That our witness is bold, even if it's going to cost us something. But our witness is to not lead them astray, but to gain, or to gain personal points with God. So I get in heaven and go, look at how many crowns I have. I don't want to get to heaven and just have a bunch of crowns. I want to get to heaven and find out a bunch of people who might not have been there was allowed to come in because God used the ministries that He could use even me. He could use even us to do. Number 3, make God your witness. So whatever you do it without any error, without any impurity, without any pretext, without any greed, so that you could be able to say at the end of the day, as God is my witness, I did as much as I knew He wanted me to do. When we witness, it can't be with flattery or pretext or greed, but it needs to be with loving, with desirous for them, with a readiness for them to share with them not only the good news of Jesus Christ. See, so many people are willing to point out somebody else's theological errors. What we really are being called to do is point out God's love. You know, theological errors will come out as say, love God. My job is not to get somebody to just hate sin. I think most people hate sin. Even sinful people hate sin. But not everybody loves God. My God is not calling me to get you to have a negative opinion of sinners. My God is to have such a high opinion of God that they'll want to share in that love for you. Because you become loving to them, you become desirous to them, you become ready to share not just the gospel, but your very life. And let me tell you, loving people can be messy. It can take time. It'll take effort. And it's worth every single bit of it. Number 6. Because God has so loved the world, He sent His Son. And because I so love God, I go. Now, if somebody would say, I'm going to go on a mission trip, let's go to Hawaii. I'm not necessarily going there because I love the Hawaiian people and culture, or I love the idea of missions. I'm looking for a vacation and going to try to tag God on it. When was the last time you heard somebody say, I moved to Las Vegas because of the wonderful climate. I just love hot, dusty. Anybody can be a sissy and live in, up in the mountains, but it takes a real godly person to stand up to valley fever. You see, for God so loved the world that he sent his son. And we should so love God that we go. And we just go. I read this week and I want to close with it. It says, ultimate delight. Now remember, delight yourself what? In the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. But ultimate delight is not a factor of our moods. I don't serve God because I mood like it. I don't put on my godly mood ring and say, oh, it's blue today. I have no idea what that means, but some of you know what that means. I don't serve God because I'm in a God mood versus a not God. My delight is the Lord. And in that delight I shall meditate day and night, so that I may do all that is written according. Isn't that what it says in Joshua 1:9? It says, ultimate delight is not in the factor of our moods or our feelings or our experiences, but a heart that is seeking to bring glory to God. Now that's a heart that loves God, and I'll tell you, that will be a heart that will be loved by people who even hate God. What kind of a disclosure do you want to make? Do I want to make when we walk out to somebody today? Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you so very much for the examples of Paul and Timothy, Silas, Apollos, Priscilla and Aquila, all of those who had part of the writing of this book. And so, Lord, I want to thank you that they were willing and desirous to mimic you, so that people would see the paracletes, the human version of a life in love with the eternal God, through the death, burial, and resurrection of the eternal Son, and through the power and direction of the eternal Spirit. So, Lord, if any of us are here today, and Lord, help us to evaluate ourselves. Have I been quick to pour out everybody else's theological error? Or have I been willing to be the example of how much I love you, that you can take the time that it takes to deal with this splinter in their eye instead of the theological login? Father, as we talk to people who are anti-Christ, negative, mean-spirited about you and about church, may we be able to be honest and be bold, and yet at the same time be desirous and loving. And help us to remember that while we ourselves were in sin, you loved us and came for us and walked and died for us. So help us to know, help us remember that you sent your Son because you loved. And we ought to be ready and desirous and wanting to go because we love you back. What a difference that would make in the presentation of the gospel with the lost and found alike. Lord, may we be appealing, not just because we dummy down our faith, but because we have prayed up our presence in Christ. So may we walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please you in all respect, bearing fruit in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God. May this be true about everyone who is here today, and even more true next week. And I pray this in the name of the Father, through the gift of the Son, and the power of the Spirit. And all God's people say, amen. Have a great week.